Here's a quick training video on how to get started with Cropster Cafe. When logging into Cropster Cafe for the first time, you should see these onboarding steps. If you don't see them, click on Cafe in the navigation bar. The first thing you need to do is set up at least one cafe location. Give your location a name and choose a country. You can add multiple cafes here in this step, but you can also add more cafes later under the Locations tab, which can be found under More. In the second step, invite other team members to use Cropster Cafe. You can assign either a cafe manager or a barista role to each team member. The roles and permissions can be changed later in the settings. In the last onboarding step, choose which parameters you're going to use in your recipes. You can set your parameters and maximum days of roast per each brewing method. Alternatively, you can go with the default set of parameters and change these later at any point. Now let's start adding our first recipe. A recipe can have one of three statuses: a draft, active, or archived. The draft and archived recipes are only visible for the cafe managers, but active recipes with a set of reference parameters are seen by all members of your team. We are currently creating a recipe for espresso from Kenya. For manual brew recipes, you would also be able to choose a brewing device. Now we are logging the parameters for the first test brew that we made with the Kenyan espresso. In this case, let's say we brewed the Kenya one more time with a slightly different grind setting and preferred the second brew. By clicking the star icon in front of the brew, we are choosing the second brew as a reference for this recipe. After choosing a reference and saving your recipe, you will also decide in which cafe locations this recipe will show up. Now we have created a draft recipe for the Kenyan espresso. However, it doesn't show up on the cafe dashboard unless we click on Include Drafts. When we go back to recipes, we see a button for changing the recipe status from draft to active. After clicking that, the recipe will show up in the recipe locations for the entire cafe team. Let's have a look at how we can log parameters for the recipe we just created. Logging a brew is similar to logging the parameters when creating a new recipe. In case this recipe is used in multiple locations and equipment stations, you can choose the correct one that you are logging from the dropdown. You also see the current set of reference parameters for this recipe. Finally, if you are opening a new bag of roasted coffee for this brew, you are able to also update the roast ID and/or roasting date along with the brew parameters. Thanks for watching. You can find more videos and manuals on our help desk at help.cropster.com.